What's going on, guys? It's Johnny the High Tech Guy here. Today we've got a special episode. We've got a cryptocurrency slash Bitcoin expert, Charlie Wagner, here talking today about the basics of Bitcoin and how we can get involved in the Bitcoin. Thanks for joining us, Charlie. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, really appreciate it. Let's see. So we'll go ahead and get you an introduction. Can you tell us a little bit about your background with cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, how you got involved in Bitcoin, and when you started investing?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. It was back in 2017, so about 3 years ago or so, late August, I would say. We were trickling up. I think it was right around the first time it hit 5K. And it was the first time ever it hit 5K. And again, the FOMO, the fear of missing out, you start hearing it about it online and through, various channels. And so definitely piqued my interest. And I think I had heard about it prior to that. I actually have a tweet out there back in January of 2014. And it was just one of those like, hey, so go sign up for a Bitcoin wallet. And I was super excited because I was like, oh man, did I really get into it back then? Because, who knows? Do I have some Bitcoin somewhere? And unfortunately, I do not. But late August 2017, I got into the space, and I've been in the space ever since. The rise up to the 20K all-time high late in 2017. And all the way through our bear market in 2018, 2019. So it's been an interesting ride, but I've been following ever since. And it's been exciting to say the least.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll get a little more into that here in a second. But first, let's back up and let's actually define and tell people what is Bitcoin and cryptocurrency.
Sure. So Bitcoin is a digital currency. You can think of it as a digital ledger of transactions, kind of like at a bank where you have checks and balances. These transactions are stored on what is called a blockchain. The ledger is distributed across the world. So anyone that has a computer can run a Bitcoin node. And you could call it the Bitcoin code, a Bitcoin program. It's a program that will keep track of all the transactions that happen on this ledger. It was created in 2009 in response to the crash in 2008. The economic crash that happened. It was actually created by a person or persons who's actually anonymous. They go by the name of Satoshi Nakamoto. So we don't actually know who created Bitcoin. There are some theories out there as to who it may be. But that's kind of the base layer of what Bitcoin is. It's just it's a digital currency. That's what I'd say there.
So digital currency, so not real sure what that means. How does it differ from regular currency?
Yeah, I think Bitcoin differs from other currencies in a way that we've really never seen before. As I said before, it's run by computer code, not by a government, not by a central bank. Unlike traditional currencies, Bitcoin is borderless. You can send it to someone in Japan, someone in Australia. Like nobody can tell you otherwise. I mean, you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry to going through customs or anything like that. It's apolitical. Bitcoin doesn't choose sides. Anyone can use it. Anyone with an internet connection has access to Bitcoin. It's transparent. You could view every transaction on the blockchain, which I think we'll get more into later. But you could just verify every single transaction. Since the start, back in 2009 when it was created, you could go back to that very first transaction ever, and you can go down the list and go through the years it's been up and running, and you can go through every single one. So It's transparent in that manner. It's trustless. You don't have to worry about a like getting counterfeit money. You don't have to worry about a third person. Like if I send you Bitcoin, you could, as long as you receive that transaction and it's confirmed, which I think again we'll get into a little bit later. You could. There's no chargebacks or anything. You don't have to worry. You don't even have to know who I am. You just know that once it's confirmed on the blockchain, you're set. You're good to go. So it's trustless and it's verifiable as well. A lot of these things, and again, I'm using Bitcoin versus traditional fiat currencies. It's censorship resistant. It cannot be censored. It's scarce, and a lot of times people now like to attribute it to digital gold. It's got a lot of the same characteristics as gold. It's like again scarce. There's only so much gold on the planet. There's only 21 million Bitcoins that will ever be in existence. So there's no more, no less. It's durable. You're not gonna like fiat currencies. You could put it down the drain or lose it. It's durable in that sense. Portable. You see all the time. I mean, taking $100,000 worth of cash around the street isn't necessarily the most portable thing to do. With Bitcoin, I mean, it's digital, so you don't got to worry. You keep it on a little hardware wallet, and you're good to go. Let's see what else. It's divisible, maybe more so. You got dollars and cents for our normal currency, the U.S. dollar, and like other currencies. Bitcoin is actually divisible to the 8th decimal. So in one Bitcoin, there are 100 million units. And those units, the smallest possible unit is called a Satoshi. And that's, again, homage to the creator. And so you don't necessarily you don't transact in one Bitcoins. Like you transact technically in Satoshis. So you could own a fraction of a Bitcoin. You don't actually have to own one full Bitcoin. So it's very divisible in that sense. And the last couple I have here is it's fungible. One Bitcoin will always equal one Bitcoin. You could think of it as if we had 2 gold bars and we just happen to want to trade. Like who's to say your gold bar is exactly as pure or as heavy or is mine? Like with Bitcoin, Bitcoin is Bitcoin. Like you could trade it and it'll always be exactly the same. And then it's unconfiscatable, which is a big thing. I think the government can't come in and tell you, or the bank can't come in and freeze your Bitcoins as long as you own the private key to those Bitcoins. So as I said before, I think it originally came out on the Bitcoin white paper back in 2009 that it was a peer-to-peer cashless system. And now I think we've kind of transitioned that mindset to where it's more of a store of value or digital gold. But yeah, I would say among other things, those are the ones that I like to point to when you're trying to find the differences as to why it's different than your normal cash you use every day.
Yeah, that's a big difference. So back on the scarcity thing, there's only 21 million. So, I mean, what happens when it runs out? Like we can print more money, right? But if like you own 21 million of them, no one else can have them. Is that how it works or what?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. It's a supply and demand. It's a simple supply and demand game, pretty much. So what happens, and I think we might get into this a little bit later, but miners will mine blocks and be rewarded Bitcoin for those purchases. And once that Bitcoin runs out, that's all there ever be. There's no one to print more Bitcoins in that sense. So I think that's one of the biggest factors, especially with everything going on in the world today. With, again, like you said, the money printing going on. That's super. What's the word I'm looking for? Beneficial for it's an alternative investment, I guess.
Wow, that's interesting. I didn't know that there's only 21 million. That's it. Yeah, nothing. Okay, so we had you previously alluded to a wallet and an address and public and private keys. Can you please explain a wallet and address and the public and private keys?
Sure. So you can think of a wallet as just, your normal wallet. You keep your cash and your credit cards in. The only thing with this is, again, it's digital. You create it online via a program. And when you create it, you're given a Bitcoin public address and then a private key. The same way you have a PayPal account with a username, your Bitcoin public address is kind of like your Bitcoin username. It's pseudonymous, so it's not totally anonymous, but it's like a string of numbers and letters, so it's not necessarily human readable. It's hard to remember exactly what the thing is, and people are out there working on that, making it. You know how the internet came out and all the websites were run via IP address. It's kind of the same thing where we went to the .com and then we made it human readable addresses, so that way Google.com, we remember that, not the actual IP address that is google.com. Same similar situation with Bitcoin. We're getting there with that. And then in addition to the public address, you're also given a private key. You could think of this as like a ATM. Like if you have an ATM card and you're given a PIN number, like you could think of it as your PIN number for your Bitcoin, or your password to your bank account, or even a key to your safe. It's how you access those Bitcoins. If you have the private key, you own the Bitcoin. If somebody else has your private key, they can take your Bitcoin.
Yeah, wow. So it's a kind of, you got to keep it secret, right? I mean, you got to keep it safe.
Yeah, your public key you could just spread out there, let everybody know, so they could use it to send you money, send you Bitcoin. But with the private key, that's the one you keep locked up, safe, away from everybody. So that way you always have complete control of your Bitcoins.
So say I wanted to pay you for like this webinar or something, and I say, what do I say? What's your public key, public address? Is that what I say? Or
yeah, what's your Bitcoin address?
And Bitcoin address?
Yeah, and you'll see it. A lot of the experts like to make a point to you'll have multiple Bitcoin addresses, mostly for security and to be more anonymous. But think of it like if a store would accept Bitcoin, they would have a Bitcoin address and people would send them money. Maybe that store doesn't necessarily want everyone to know exactly how much money they're receiving. Maybe they would have multiple Bitcoin addresses. So it's not necessarily where you have one wallet for everything. They're pretty, I have multiple Bitcoin addresses, but you could have multiple Bitcoin addresses. They're basically just hashes and under one private key. So you could have one private key, but you could have multiple addresses with each, if that makes sense.
Is that like if you have multiple PayPal accounts or something? Or?
Yeah, similar, or more like it would be like you owning one PayPal account, but you have maybe multiple usernames that you could send money to, but it would still go to that singular PayPal account.
Okay. And you want to do that? Why? Because you don't want. Can people see how much money you got in the public address? Or
if they have, there's something called a block explorer, and like I said in the beginning, it's a transparent ledger. So if you go to this block explorer and you give me your public Bitcoin address, I could put it in the block explorer and I can see every single Bitcoin payment that has ever been made to you or that address. Now I'm not going to know who made those addresses. It's not human readable. I don't know. It's semi-anonymous. I don't know who's behind those addresses that were sent to you, but you can still see every single transaction that has ever been sent to you.
Wow, that's kind of and anyone can see that. Mm-hmm. That's kind of weird. Mm-hmm. It's like everyone can see my ledger, my bank account. Is that like that? Or?
Essentially, yeah, it's transparent in that regard.
Wow. Why would you want to do that?
Uh, it's I think
I mean,
it's I think it's
isn't
better
it?
in the end. I mean, it's the whole ethos of Bitcoin, right? It's just being transparent. Again, unless somebody knows that that is your Bitcoin address, and that goes back to the why would you want multiple Bitcoin addresses? Is
Yeah,
because
yeah.
if nobody knows that the address is yours, they don't know what transactions are, but that transactions are that are going to you. Um, but it's just in the ethos to be transparent and immutable, and those transactions cannot be changed. So
So someone can pull up my public address if they, I mean, because it's public, right?
mm.
And I can see that um, there was like I spent like $50 or whatever 50 what'd you call them, the units or
Satoshis.
Satoshis. I spent 50 Satoshis here, and I got 100 here, and I got 50 here. They can see all that stuff, but they don't know who did it, right?
Yeah, it would basically all you would see is your public address sent 50 satoshis to this public address, and that's all you would see. You wouldn't, and you would unless you did a heck of a lot more digging and forensics as to okay, who trying to figure out who owns what. It's very difficult to figure out all those transactions, but you're not gonna, it's not like a bank account where you would be like, okay, John Kim bought Starbucks for this and then John Kim bought this. No, it's, hey, some public address spent Bitcoin and sent it to this public address, and that's it.
So it only show one transaction, or does it show all the transactions for that?
It'll show every transaction that address has made.
Wow. I don't know if I like that, man.
Hey,
Yeah.
there's give or takes, pros and cons. I mean, some people like to be more private, and there are different cryptocurrencies for everything. I mean, we're just talking about Bitcoin today, but there are privacy-centric cryptocurrencies out there that don't show pretty much anything. They show, very limited things, and there are privacy-centric coins out there. So, with Bitcoin. It leans more toward the transparent ledger. It's just semi-anonymous to where you don't really know who's who. So,
Okay. Okay. So you can see that somebody spent like 1 million Bitcoins, and you're like, wow, this dude's a big time player, right? I mean, but you don't know who it is, right?
exactly. And I mean, we were talking about it before we started. We saw that the Fed actually moved almost $1 billion of Bitcoins. And the only reason we know that is because it's transparent. We saw the transaction, or somebody saw the transaction go through, and it was a $1 billion transaction from one public key to another public key. And, there's smarter people out there that can figure out who's who and where it came from. Some of it's public knowledge, but the whole point is, like, for the normal user, I mean, you wouldn't know who owned what or who moved what. So,
Wow. Okay. But if I had your public key, and you gave me your public key, and I paid you some money, um, I know I paid you money, so I could look at your transactions in the public key. So I knew that Charlie spent all this money, right?
yeah, I mean, you can see I moved it out of the wallet, but outside of that, I mean, creating a Bitcoin wallet, although it may seem daunting, is no, sorry, not a Bitcoin wallet, a Bitcoin address. I mean, again, you could have multiple Bitcoin addresses in one wallet. So, if you send it to one public address, I could just move it over to my other public address that you didn't know that I actually own, and then you would pretty much just, oh, okay, I guess he spent it, but you would never know what I spent it on or anything like that.
Okay. Okay. Let's go back to something you said earlier about mining. Can you tell us what mining is?
Sure. So mining is basically powers the Bitcoin blockchain. So if you think of gold, we go back to the gold thing. So with gold, you need big machines, power, resources to extract the gold from the ground. Well, with Bitcoin, instead of big machines, you have extremely powerful computers, and they're tasked to solve complex computational math problems. And then when a computer solves this problem, it's rewarded with Bitcoin. This is called the block reward. Way back in 2009, it started when a block was solved. You were rewarded 50 Bitcoins. And then every 4 years, this reward of Bitcoin is halved. So, from 2009, 4 years later, you got 25 Bitcoin per math computation solved. And then, after that, 12.5. And then we just actually hit earlier this year, it's called the halvening. And it's a big thing because, again, it basically takes the circulating supply and it just cuts it, or the Bitcoins created each year, it cuts them in half. And now it's 6.25 Bitcoin per block solved. And then by block, so we'll get back up a little bit. So the transactions that are submitted, so if I send you some Bitcoin, those are submitted to the blockchain on the ledger. And then these transactions are grouped into blocks by these miners that run these specialized computers. And then the miners are basically there to just secure the network and prevent double spending. So they group all these transactions in a block, and then all these computers try to solve this problem. And then if they could solve the problem, that block of transactions is attached to the current chain, and then they are rewarded with the Bitcoin. So they basically are there to secure the network and make sure that when you send me, half a Bitcoin, whatever, that you can't also send somebody else that Bitcoin at the same time.
So I'm a little confused on, at first we said there's only a certain amount of Bitcoin, but then we're mining to make more, or that's not how it works?
No, so there is 21 million Bitcoin. However, they're not all mined yet. The block rewards are part of that 21 million. So I don't think, I think it's like the year 2140 when the last Bitcoin will be mined out of that 21 million. So it started with 21 million, but they weren't all distributed all at once. You originally had, well, you still have to. You have to mine those Bitcoins in order to receive them from that pool of 21 million. So, and then again, it keeps having every 4 years. So there's less and less Bitcoin that it's being extracted every year. And then again, the last one, it will be long gone before I'll be long gone before it gets mined. So,
yeah. So what kind of, what kind of math problems are they? Is it kind of, I don't understand that part, like it's solving math problems.
That's a great question. That one's, they're just ridiculously hard. It's not a simple math problem that you could write down on pen and paper. These computers are trying to solve these problems over and over again until they get the right answer, kind of thing. It probably gets more technical. Definitely gets more technical than that. And it's even over my head on exactly how it happens.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. So, is it like solving a problem for a purpose, or is it just saying, hey, you've got to, why do you got to mine it if it's just out there? Can't you just buy them?
So you could definitely buy Bitcoin. People that already have Bitcoin can exchange Bitcoin with one another. I think the real purpose behind the computational power, so you need a certain. I mean, when it first started in 2009, you could mine Bitcoin with a laptop. You load up the Bitcoin mining software code, and you could start mining, and you could solve blocks with just a measly old laptop. Now, there are huge Bitcoin. They're called Bitcoin mining farms, and they have thousands and thousands of these computers that are trying to solve these very complex math problems. And the reason being, there's something called a 51% attack, which basically, if you have enough computational power, you can try and change the blocks. You could put your own transactions, and you could create double spends on the transactions, or you can manipulate the transactions and kind of put them how you want them if you have enough computational power. And so I think that's where those math problems come in. Like, you need so much computer power in order to actually. Man, you had a good question there. I'm trying to explain it simply enough for your viewers.
Yeah.
Let me think about that one. I'll get back to you on that one.
Yeah, that's probably good, definitely, because I'm interested in it. I was like, why the hell I gotta solve a math problem to get some Bitcoin? That's weird.
Yeah.
I just don't understand. Yeah, that's cool. Okay, we'll just keep going. So all that said, like, let's talk about kind of like the purpose of Bitcoin. Why would someone want to use Bitcoin if they got like regular money and stuff?
Well, I mean, as we alluded to earlier, with everything going on in the world and our current financial system, we're printing money like mad. Our currency. I mean, there's plenty of people around the world that use different currencies, but the U.S. dollar is being inflated and printed with virtually nothing backing it up. And I think the value proposition of Bitcoin is that scarcity aspect, that digital gold, that stored value. I don't necessarily think anyone should be spending their Bitcoin right now, but that's just my personal preference. But with everything going on, I think, I mean, there are big investors getting into the space now. Paul Tudor Jones, and just they're starting to realize that with everything going on in the world, I think Michael Saylor put it really well. He's the CEO of MicroStrategy. Jeez. And they ended up buying, $425 million worth of Bitcoin. They're a publicly traded company. They put it on their treasury reserves, actual Bitcoin. And he said something to the effect of, well, I had this much money just sitting on the sidelines, and I was trying to figure out where to put it. And it felt like keeping it in cash. It felt like a melting ice cube because of the inflation and everything that's going on in the world. And everything that we said in the beginning, the difference between Bitcoin and traditional currencies, he thought that Bitcoin was a solid bet. And I mean, it's the hardest money on the planet due to its scarcity. So
yeah, definitely, because you can't make more. Robert Kiyosaki's buying Bitcoin right now.
Yep.
That's crazy, man. If he's doing it, it's time to start doing it. That's kind of how I was, how I thought about it. And I remember when we first talked about it way back in the day, I was like, man, I ain't touching that stuff, dude, for Paul, man. But the rose, it fell, and now it's rising again, and people are understanding it, and people are getting into it. So it's becoming popular now. PayPal is like starting to accept it. It's becoming more mainstream. So it's like, man, you got to understand it now.
I mean, for sure, the PayPal thing is huge. I mean, what do they have? 340 some million users that are going to be able to be exposed to Bitcoin. Right. The one thing I do want to note with the PayPal thing is, so we were mentioning the public key and private key with PayPal. you're never going to actually own you're going to have your private key. They're going to have your private key. So there's a difference there. You won't actually own your Bitcoin because you never have the private key. So PayPal wanted to say, hey, your Bitcoin's frozen. It kind of defeats the ethos of why somebody would want to hold Bitcoin in the first place. But outside of that, it does make it way easier for the mom and pop, the normal user, to just gain some exposure. And again, 340 million users having exposure to Bitcoin. That's it's starting to become a heck of a lot more mainstream than it has in the past, and we've been running for well over a decade now. So,
wow, yeah. I mean, it's about time that it stood the test of time, kind of, to me, and at first I was like, I didn't understand it, and I was like, why the hell would I want to put my money in somebody else's garage or something, in my mind? And I was like, dude, that it doesn't make any sense. But now that these big time players are coming in, I'm like, man, I better start paying attention to this thing.
Right.
So I mean, so talking about that, what are some practical examples of using Bitcoin? How do I use it?
I mean, I think the biggest practical example these days is just, payments. Just payments back and forth to one another, payments for goods and services. It's just the fact that it's so easy to, I know a lot of people, there's a lot of testimonials out there that, people living in the US and having their family somewhere else in another country where it is very difficult to get US dollars to them. How do you get US dollars to them? You go through Western Union, pay a bunch of fees. You might get 60-70% of what they might get 60-70% of what you send them. And even then, you hear those stories of people getting robbed they prey on those kind of situations. So with Bitcoin, as long as they have internet connection and a Bitcoin address, you shoot that over and it's in their hands in less than 10 minutes without any other intermediary or anything. No, So I think that's one of the biggest practical examples. I know people don't necessarily think of it that way because, not a lot of people that I know have family in other countries, but there's plenty of examples, Greece, Venezuela, where their currency has been inflated to oblivion, and they're making only so much money, and definitely not enough to live on. And if you have Bitcoin, you can send it, and you don't have to worry about a government seizing it or taking control or just managing it.
Yeah, how's it valued?
What, Bitcoin?
Yeah.
At this point, you could take a lot of people like to use the miners and the computational power and how much electricity it takes to run all those computers. There's a cost associated with all that, and I know there's some websites out there that maybe you can link in your video. I'll see if I can find them that will show you, depending on how much electricity is, this is how much money it would cost to mine one Bitcoin. And they have those broken down. So a lot of people like to value based on that. But it's also a belief. What gives the dollar value outside of trusting your government that they're, in the end, fiat currency is backed by nothing. Once we left the gold standard, it's backed by nothing. So it's interesting. Again, I think it's an interesting experiment that has lasted for a decade, where people find value and are just kind of trying to shelter themselves from the current financial system and they do see value in the code and all the benefits that it brings. So I think people just are now coming together in consensus saying, hey, we like all these things that Bitcoin brings to the table. So we were going to value it at this. But again, it's an open market. It's a free market with this. We're right now we're in price discovery. Like we don't know. We're finding out every single day how much it's worth.
Wow. Yeah. And it was pretty volatile there for a while. What have you noticed a trend of being more stable, or is it still up and down and crazy?
There are a lot of studies out there that actually is way less volatile. Now, in the beginning, when I got in, one of the first things I experienced getting in back in late August of 2017, like I said, it had gone up and it hit 5K Bitcoin for the very first time. And not 2 weeks later, we tanked 40% down to 3,000. And that was off of the news out of China that they were banning Bitcoin.
Right.
And that was like my first experience. And I was like, oh my goodness, like what am I getting into? So yeah, it is volatile. It has gone way less volatile. It's gotten way less volatile over the years. The more money that comes in, the tighter those spreads get. And I mean, there are some studies out there that show that it is a lot less volatile than the media likes to portray it. And yeah, it's getting better. And the more money that comes in, the less volatile it's going to get.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about the volatility. I kind of skipped ahead a little bit.
Oh, you're fine.
Yeah. So I've heard a lot when I first started hearing about the Bitcoin, and we talked about it earlier with the Silk Road thing. I thought that Bitcoin is just like mainly used for criminal transactions, right? The criminals are, they want to be hidden and stuff, and they don't want to be known and want to be secret. So it's just all criminal stuff.
Yeah, I think, that was certainly how Bitcoin got into the limelight. The criminals, regardless of what people like to say, they're smart. They know a good idea when they see one, and Bitcoin just happened to be that good idea at the time. And Silk Road was a place where you could sell illicit drugs for Bitcoin. It was easier to transact in Bitcoin versus cash. It was, again, semi-anonymous, so it works for that purpose. But I mean, there are studies out there that, less than 1% of Bitcoin transactions are used for that kind of stuff nowadays. In the past, yeah, it was a lot more. But once Silk Road got shut down, you could also kind of, compare it to cash. Cash is king when it comes to criminal transactions. That's the last, anonymous transaction of our legacy financial system. Like, we're not going to get any more anonymous than throwing cash around. So trust me, I guarantee criminals would rather use cash if it's feasible. But again, Bitcoin allows for that whole cross borders thing, easier to transact large amounts. Again, carrying 100K cash across the border just isn't going to cut it. Malicious people are going to use it to their advantage, but it's very small, and it doesn't hurt Bitcoin whatsoever.
Okay. Other than the criminal stuff, I've also heard of some, horror stories of Bitcoin and stuff, and the dangers of Bitcoin investing. What are some of the dangers that you know of investing in Bitcoin?
Yeah, we could go back to I don't know, I wouldn't really call it a danger. Like I said, it is volatile. You definitely, one thing that's part of the Bitcoin community that people like to say a lot is definitely don't invest more than you could afford to lose. It is volatile. It is emotional when you see those big 30% drops. And, if you're too emotional about it, you sell it at a loss, and then it starts going up again, and then you buy it again, and then it goes down again. Like, it's just, you could easily get into a lot of trouble trying to play the market and whatever. I don't do that. I like to buy a little bit, dollar cost average. So I kind of stay out of those horror stories in that sense. Now, have I been in those horror stories? Have I been a victim of that myself? Absolutely. I have FOMO'd in plenty of times and got burned in that sense. But as long as you keep a level head and keep emotion, or try to keep emotion out of it, and you realize that it is going to be volatile. But in the end, due to the dynamics of Bitcoin and the supply and demand and the fact that there's only 21 million, it eventually is going to keep going up. So I think there's a post out there saying that there's only been, with the current price of Bitcoin right now, there's only been like 40 days. I think it says something like there's 99% of Bitcoin wallets are up on their investment now.
Wow.
So you had to buy a Bitcoin in like the month and a half period way back in 2017 at like the worst possible time, at 40 days worth, and you would still be down a little bit. But even then, again, it's rising again. So I'm sure that'll change here pretty soon. The other thing I would say as far as horror stories is, just it could be stolen. Somebody gets your private key. If I find John's private key sitting down over here, I could log in, grab your Bitcoin, send it to myself, and you don't have support. There's nobody you could talk to in order to retrieve those. And that, I think, is the biggest thing that anyone getting into Bitcoin, it just needs to keep those private keys as safe as can be. So that would be, yeah,
definitely. That's definitely a big danger. I would think. If someone's not really careful, they can. You leave your wallet laying around, right? You get your wallet stolen, right? Like a real wallet with your cash, right?
Right.
It's like, boom, you got to be careful with anything, right?
Yeah, for sure. People, there's fake websites, that they'd say, hey, you want to create a Bitcoin wallet? Sure, go ahead. And you think you're creating a legitimate Bitcoin wallet. They throw you a private key that you think nobody else knows. And little do you know, a hacker on the other end already has that private key. So you load up some Bitcoin, and before you know it, it's gone. Wow. So the big thing there is just always make sure you're using the legitimate crypto websites. The couple ones that I like to use. Coinbase is a really big one. PayPal, again, now, although you're not really owning your Bitcoin, is still a good option for new users because you don't necessarily have to worry about that. As long as you keep your PayPal account safe, and then PayPal keeps your Bitcoin safe, then you're fine. So you just got to make sure you got to watch out for those kind of malicious websites and just keep those private keys safe. As long as you do that, you'll be pretty well off.
Yeah, talking about Bitcoins getting stolen, how does it happen and how can it be prevented?
Again, you just have to keep your items safe, your private keys safe. Otherwise, if nobody knows your private key, you would need a quantum computer to try and solve your private key and brute force that. You really wouldn't need to. It's very unlikely your Bitcoins would get compromised if you keep everything safe. So as long as you keep them offline, don't keep them in the cloud, don't keep them on Google Cloud or OneDrive, things like that, or in your email. As long as you're keeping them offline, put them on a text document, print it out, go put it in your safe or something, or a bank, safety deposit box. You just want to be careful with that, and that's the best way to prevent your Bitcoins from being stolen.
Wow. Oh, that's interesting. So, a little bit more about security while in a transaction. Like when I'm paying you, talk about security a little bit. Is it safe when I do that?
Yeah. So transactions, each block, depending, we go back to that complex math problem.
Yeah.
The smart people out there have made it so that about every 10 minutes, depending on how many computers are trying to solve this problem, about every 10 minutes, a computer will solve that problem and they will get rewarded, and that block will be added to the blockchain. So the Bitcoiners and the cryptocurrency people out there will like to say, like, after about 5 blocks, it's virtually impossible for that transaction to get reversed. So when you submit a transaction, we can go quickly to the next question because they kind of go together.
Sure.
When you submit a transaction, like if I submit a transaction to you, it is considered an unconfirmed transaction, and it is put in a big pool of transactions with all the other transactions that are coming in on the Bitcoin network. And all these miners will grab these transactions coming into this pool and stick them in their block. Every miner could technically have different transactions. They try to be, first in. If I got this transaction first, we'll put it in, but that's not always the case. There is something called fees. If you pay a higher fee, miners will try to take your transaction first. So there's a little bit of a game theory there where it's like Bitcoin miners will always try, because they also, on top of the Bitcoin reward, they'll also earn any fees that people include in their transaction. That's a whole different story. We go on a whole nother video about Bitcoin fees. So anyway, they grab all these transactions from the pool, and they put them in a block, and they try to solve the problem first. And they solve the problem. Those Bitcoins are rewarded to them. They attach the block of transactions to the blockchain. And then now, as long as your transaction is included in that block that they confirmed, you get one confirmation that says, okay, your transaction is now officially on the Bitcoin blockchain. And the reason why people like to wait for a few blocks is, like, we go back to I mentioned the 51% attack. If you have enough computational power in the world, you can solve those blocks faster, and you can pick those transactions that you want if you're a malicious actor, and basically put those blocks on the blockchain how you want. You could sort them exactly how you want in a way that it will benefit you. But right now, with all I forget how many, I think it's up to like petahashes or terahashes or something. It's a ridiculous amount of computational power. I think there's a website called, let me see, I had it up here real quick, crypto51.app. They say it takes roughly $803,000 per hour to try and perform this 51% attack on the Bitcoin blockchain. And again, it's just malicious actors trying to, use transactions and double spend. Their whole idea is double spending. So they send Bitcoin one way, and then they change the blocks up so it looks like they didn't send it, and then they send it again. They just try to send Bitcoin over and over again, essentially. So that's why after 5 confirmed blocks, like, the likelihood of a hacker changing up all those blocks is pretty slim. And the only reason why is just, again, think of it as a chargeback. Like if somebody pays you in PayPal and they're like, oh, you know what? Nah, he didn't give me what he said he was going to. And they charge back, and all of a sudden you're out that money. Think of it the same way. As long as you have enough confirmed blocks, there is no chargebacks in Bitcoin. You can't just whatever. And the whole 51% attack, as far as I know, it's never happened in Bitcoin in its existence, so it's not something you have to worry about. It is a possibility. So depending on how big your transaction, if you're sending $1 million to somebody, you want to make sure the person receiving it wants to make sure there's a few transactions or a few block confirmations so that they know, because the more blocks that are produced, the more secure it is, or the more unlikely it is for a hacker to change those transactions.
So let's say that I bought something and I didn't like it. And I'm like, hey, dude, I didn't like it. Give me my money back. He doesn't have to give it back, right? He doesn't have to give the Bitcoin.
With Bitcoin, no. I mean, technically, I mean, he wouldn't have to give it back at all. I mean, it would obviously that goes into like, you know, your agreement with that person. But if they said no and they wanted to break the agreement, no, there's no one that can say there's no one that could force him to give back that Bitcoin.
Wow. Okay. So it's kind of like the Wild West kind of thing, right?
Yeah, I mean that's certainly it right now. I mean, earlier on it was definitely. I think we're getting more mainstream these days, especially with these big billionaires coming in saying. I mean, they understand how safe and secure. I mean, Bitcoin hasn't been hacked in its entire existence as far as the network. Sure, the users' wallets have been stolen and stuff like that, but the network as a whole has been secure pretty much since its inception, as far as I can remember. So, I mean, you just saw the Fed move $1 billion worth of Bitcoin. You wouldn't do that if you didn't think it was going to get to the place that you thought it was going to.
Right. So speaking of the volatility, can you share with us the rise and fall and rise again of Bitcoin and where it's at today?
Yeah. So, I mean, back in 2009, it started at pennies. It was pennies. No one. It didn't even have value. I should say it had zero value. And over time, it started gaining value. People started the early OG Bitcoiners saw value in this. Once the first exchange was brought up, then people could actually exchange real US dollars for Bitcoin, and that's where the price started going up after. Again, supply and demand, and whoever thought it was worth something, they started buying it, and people were selling it and all that. So that's where the price started. And I mean, from pennies in 2009 all the way up to $20,000 in 2017.
Wow.
And
That's
then
was that for one Bitcoin?
Yep, one Bitcoin in 2017. We hit a peak of $20,000.
Wow.
And then we fell back down. Now, granted, there was a lot of spikes and dips throughout the way, but from the beginning to the top, it was 20,000. Then we went through after the early 2018. We hit our bear market. It was, we just came out of it this year. We think we got down to 3,000 from 20,000. So a hefty drop. If you buy at the top, there's plenty of people that sold and whatnot. So, but we're back up around. I think we're very close, but I think we almost hit 16K yesterday, actually.
Wow.
So we're on the way, and like you mentioned before, there are big investors and billionaires that are starting to realize the value of owning Bitcoin, and they're buying. And with Bitcoin, every year the amount of Bitcoins that are created is going down, and the more people that get interested, you kind of see where that's going. I mean, there's a post out there. I think I can find it and show you, but like PayPal and Square Cash that allow you to buy Bitcoin. There's something called the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust. They're all selling more Bitcoin that's actually being created to users. So there's a huge supply shock right now, and that kind of is the reason why the price continues to rise, because there's not enough sellers for the amount of buyers right now.
Yeah. Wow. So where do you see Bitcoin in the future going? Is it here to stay?
I think so. I think so. I mean, we've had a solid 10 plus year run already. And every day that goes by, it just proves that it's still here. It's not going anywhere. Every day that goes by, the likelihood of it going back to zero in people's minds goes away. So I don't think it's going anywhere.
Yeah, yeah. So Bitcoin, is it anonymous?
No, again, it's the trend. It's completely transparent. It's pseudonymous, semi-anonymous. You have your private key that unless somebody specifically knows that you own that, you are semi-anonymous to that the person across the world. They don't know that you have that address unless you explicitly state or maybe put it on your social media, your Bitcoin address. But outside of that, it is not completely anonymous, but it's pretty close. The transactions are the ones that are transparent.
So if you got mad at me or something and you paid me some money on my public wallet, is that right?
The public address, yeah.
Public address. And then you can say, well, screw you, dude. And then you can tell everybody in the world my public address. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, technically.
Yeah. Wow. And then anybody can say, oh, this is the dude's public address. Look how much money he's bringing in and out of his address, right?
Yeah, and in that sense, you'd if you wanted to, you could create a new address or a couple addresses and start splitting your transactions. And you had to go down that route, you could start sending your transactions to your different Bitcoin addresses that you own, and then the normal person would just think you paid somebody else, and they wouldn't know that the address that you sent it to after the one that they know is yours, they don't know that the next one is you too, So
Yeah.
you could shoot down the ladder that way, and the normal person would never know. Now there's companies out there that are getting paid a good money to track these transactions on the Bitcoin network. So like they got a whole bunch of forensics and programs that figure that out. But I mean, outside of the normal person, if somebody wanted to do that, you just shoot it over to a new Bitcoin address and say, I don't have it anymore, and go from there.
Okay. So it's still experimental, right? The Bitcoin. I mean, we said it a couple of times. I mean, I think it's still right.
Yeah, I mean, I would say so. I mean, we're still at a point where not a lot of people. I mean, people have heard of it, but they don't know how it works or anything like that. I mean, that's most of the reason why we're even doing this video right now. So it's definitely an experiment in the new monetary system. I definitely think it's going to succeed in just because of how our current monetary system is going and the monetary systems around the country. If you look at the central banks right now and the EMF, they're already talking about central bank digital currencies that they want to do themselves. So, yeah, you could certainly say it's still an experiment, but it's definitely been a successful one. And I think that it has a proven track record up until this point. So I don't want to say it's a experiment in a bad way. It's definitely an experiment that is coming to fruition to a point where it's given people a lot more opportunity than maybe they've ever had before.
Yeah, could if America got pissed or something, could America like shut it down somehow or anything, or like Russia or China or something? I mean,
it would have to be a huge coordinated attack with multiple countries, and they'd have to shut down like the entire internet. Outside of that happening, it would be very, very difficult. And even then, I mean, look at Elon; he's throwing up satellites on his satellite network for internet. I mean, they got I'm pretty sure there's someone out there that's already running a Bitcoin node on a satellite. So it's like the likelihood I mean, they could hurt it with a coordinated attack, but the likelihood of that happening now it's slim to none in my mind.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it could be shut down. Um, so let's talk a little bit more about the mainstream acceptance of Bitcoin. Is it an official currency? I mean, is it like Bitcoin official? Is it like?
I think it's being seen that way now. I don't. I mean, they're like I said, the second MicroStrategy put it in its reserves, a public company that had to go through a board of directors. I mean, people are really starting to see it as an official currency that's not going to go away. You could pay. There's companies out there. I have my own crypto debit card that I use to pay for things every single day. So, if official in that sense, I definitely think so.
Yeah, I mean, so like so you got a debit card, a Bitcoin debit card. So if the price goes up or down, that reflects how much money you have on the debit card, right?
To a certain extent, yeah. There's other cryptocurrencies that are called stable coins, which is a whole different thing. But their whole purpose is to be pegged to the U.S. dollar. So a lot of the time on my debit card specifically, I'll just have that stable coin loaded on there and not actual Bitcoin. I keep my Bitcoin elsewhere. If I want to move my Bitcoin over to spend it, I could do that. But most of the time, I just use those stable coins, so I don't have to worry about the volatility when I'm spending it. And that's going to come in hand. Like the central bank digital currency is going to be the same thing. They're going to be pegged at $1 or whatever. So there's not going to be any volatility associated with those. So I don't have to necessarily worry about that with spending.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know you can't predict the future or anything, but when do you think the mainstream population will accept Bitcoin as a payment type?
Once PayPal rolls out its 25 or so million merchants for payment, they as we mentioned before, I mean they're starting to accept Bitcoin purchases, and they also said that every single one of their merchants are going to accept Bitcoin as well. How they do that on the back end, if the merchant is actually going to get Bitcoin or just get it exchanged for US dollars, who knows? But I mean, the second that goes live, I think that's when there's so many people that use PayPal. It's so easy. People know how to use it. They're going to make it very easy. You're not going to have to know how Bitcoin works. You're not going to have to know whether or not a company accepts it. If they accept PayPal, they accept Bitcoin. And I think once that goes live next year, whenever it is, they said it was, that's when I think we hit full throttle with that mainstream adoption.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's the game changer, right? The PayPal thing, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but like I said before, it's not really yours though, right? It's not really your Bitcoin, right? It's PayPal's Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Or not.
No, it's PayPal's Bitcoin. If they wanna say nope, you're doing something nefarious, we're not going to give you this. And they even said, I mean, you can't even trade or take your Bitcoin from PayPal and put it into your own wallet, or you can't do anything like that initially. Square Cash did the same thing initially. They said you could only trade Bitcoin within the app. You cannot move it outside of the app. And eventually you're going to be able to. They'd be ridiculous. There's too much competition out there that allow you to do that for PayPal not to allow you to do that. So eventually it'll happen. But again, for the normal user that doesn't have a ridiculous amount of money invested, I would say PayPal is perfectly fine to use. Once you start getting up to crazy amounts, you definitely want to make sure that you have complete control and just be like owning. You don't want somebody else owning your bank account, right? So kind of the same situation.
Okay, that's good to know for sure. So when you're using Bitcoin or buying and selling, I guess, do you have to pay taxes when you use Bitcoin?
Yeah, this one's a loaded question. There's been a lot of a lot of different regulations, or at least talks. Right now, shoot, it's been a while since I've looked. As far as I'm understanding right now, every single transaction you make, like if I send you some Bitcoin, you have to. I got to record when I bought it, that Bitcoin, and how much it was worth, and then the second I send it to you, I have to record how much I sent to you and how much it was worth, so I can get taxed on either the capital gains or whatever. So taxes hopefully are getting there's more clarity on those sooner than later. But yes, you do have to pay taxes for Bitcoin transactions. PayPal, I assume, is going to make it a heck of a lot easier to track those taxes. They may even bundle them in for every transaction, so you don't have to worry about it. Who knows? I don't know if that's the case. But yeah, you definitely have to pay taxes when using Bitcoin.
Okay. Wow. Thought I could get away with not paying taxes.
You could. I'm sure you could get away for a little while, but the tax man will always catch you.
It'll always get you. That's right. But I mean, whose taxes do you pay? I mean, is it like the country that you do it in, or?
Yeah.
I mean, if I pay like Zimbabwe, do I pay Zimbabwe tax, or like? I mean.
Again, it's
that's your accountant, right?
Exactly.
Oh man, that's funny. That's cool. So the $1 million question is, okay, so now I'm ready. I want to buy Bitcoin or invest in Bitcoin. Are there exchanges that have stocks, or do you just go buy some Bitcoin? I mean, how does that work?
Well, the beauty of that, thanks to PayPal, is you create a PayPal account and go get you some Bitcoin. And if you want to go the route where you actually get into a point where you kind of have more control over it, there are companies like Coinbase is a very popular one that allows you to link up your bank account, and then you buy Bitcoin from them. It's an exchange, but it's a very user-friendly exchange where you don't have to actually go into like a stock market style exchange. So it's fairly simple now to get your hands on some Bitcoin. Square Cash, same thing, has the same kind of interface. I think Robinhood even you could. So a lot of these places are offering those services, but the two that I use fairly often are Coinbase and then a company called Crypto.com, which is that debit card that I was talking about earlier. That's the company that backs that debit card and allows me to use it. And you could, through the mobile app, I can buy Bitcoin straight from that and then load it onto my card.
If I just wanted to invest in Bitcoin, like, is there like a stock that I can do like this, like buy stock in Bitcoin, or is that not a thing?
There is something called the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust. I don't remember exactly the how to define it, but it is a traditional stock that you can buy. But outside of that, I mean, an ETF is in the works. It's been in the works for a while. That will probably end up coming. That will kind of tie traditional markets into buying Bitcoin like a stock. But if you wanted to invest in Bitcoin for all those reasons we mentioned earlier, you'd want to use one of those, like, again, Coinbase, Crypto.com, where you would just buy Bitcoin straight from that application or company.
Okay. And I could, you said a Bitcoin is 16,000. I don't have 16,000. So could I buy less than one Bitcoin?
Yeah, absolutely. It's divisible on the 100 million units. So if you want to buy 0.0001 Bitcoin, whatever that is right now, you can buy. If you want to buy $50 worth of Bitcoin, the exchange will calculate that rate, and you can buy $50 worth of Bitcoin, $20 worth of Bitcoin. You definitely don't have to own one full Bitcoin. That's a common misconception. People see that price tag and they're like, I can't afford a Bitcoin. And it's just like, no, don't worry about that. You don't have to own a full one. That's the goal. I mean, that's the goal. Everyone, you want to get to that one Bitcoin, because again, there's 21 million. There's more millionaires in the world than there is Bitcoin.
Wow.
Uh, so not even if every millionaire wanted a Bitcoin, it's literally impossible for every millionaire to have one full Bitcoin.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. So if I go to Coinbase, um, I set up my account or something, and then it creates the public key and the private key through Coinbase. Is that right?
Yeah, Coinbase is similar to PayPal in the sense of they hold on to your private key, but you can transfer your Bitcoin out to a wallet that you own the private keys for. They just make it really easy for you. It's just like setting up a PayPal account or a bank account. You enter your information, you tell them who you are, and you link up your bank account. You buy some Bitcoin, and then you can keep it in there. But if you set up a wallet where you actually have the private keys, then you could just take that Bitcoin and send it to your address that you own fully, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, how do you own it fully? Is there some kind of?
By own it fully, I just mean you having those private keys. That's what I mean by that.
I mean, so you can't do that going through like Coinbase, right? How would you set up your wallet yourself, I guess is my real question.
They have there's a lot of mobile apps now, and even websites that allow you to create your own Bitcoin wallet that will keep your private key facing you, and they'll tell you, okay, here's your private key, write it down and store it somewhere safe. And you can create it on the web or through a mobile app, and then you just write it down and keep it safe. I could shoot you some apps that allow that, and if you want to link them in the video or use them and try them out, you can. But yeah, there's plenty of programs and companies out there that allow you to do that.
How's that different from Coinbase?
It's just that Coinbase always has control of your private keys. Oh. So if they decide they want to lock your account for whatever their reasoning is, they can. With a wallet that you own the private keys for, nobody can do that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It sounds like, I mean, do you own your own private keys, or do you go through Coinbase?
I have Bitcoin a lot of places. I initially used Coinbase, and I still use Coinbase periodically. But like a good chunk of my cryptocurrency is held on something that's called a hardware wallet, which is a whole different thing that we could talk about. But yeah, I definitely have the majority of my crypto holdings in a place where I own the private keys.
Yeah, and send me those. I mean, it sounds like that's the way you want to go, right?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's definitely more safe, and it makes it so that, again, that unconfiscatable, all those benefits of having Bitcoin, like owning your private keys, afford you all those, I guess you'd call them rights, but the features of Bitcoin.
Yeah. Do you know any names offhand? I mean,
again, crypto.com has a separate mobile app that is outside of their custody. So it's like they have their normal one that uses the card and everything, and you could exchange Bitcoins. And then they have a different one that you can set up to where they don't own the private keys. They allow you to create a wallet. They give you the private key, and then you can store it there. So that was the one. There's a couple. The Exodus wallet is another one. There's a plenty out there that we can get into maybe at a different time. But yeah, they're out there for sure.
Okay. So we talked about a whole bunch of stuff, and for the common person like myself, what is some advice you can give about investing in Bitcoin?
The biggest thing you'll hear all the time is do your own research. Don't believe everything you hear. Don't believe everything I say. There's plenty of people out there that want to take your Bitcoins or whatever. There's plenty of malicious actors. Make sure you're doing your own research and getting your own knowledge from reputable sources, and just try not to be emotional. Understand what you're getting into. Like we mentioned earlier, it can get volatile, but if you really kind of keep the reasoning as to why you're investing in this, I mean, for me, I look at it as financial freedom from the current system, and just it's nice to know that I have control of my money, and nobody can take that from me. And that's, I think, a lot of the reason why people kind of get involved. So outside of that, I mean, just keep learning about it and understanding it, and you'll be great.
Yeah, yeah. So Bitcoin is the big one, but are there other types of cryptocurrency that can be
thousands?
Okay,
thousands. Yeah, it's getting to a point where when apps for phones first came out, and that the saying was, "Oh, there's an app for that." Well, it's kind of the same scenario. There's a cryptocurrency for that. There's cryptocurrencies that introduce smart contracts where it's basically a contract computer code where, if one thing happens, another thing happens and it triggers something else. Like it's wild out there for sure. For the normal person, definitely start with Bitcoin, but that's not at all where it ends. Once you go down that rabbit hole of everything else, there's some crazy, really interesting projects out there that are trying to solve some real world problems. So,
yeah, wow, yeah, I think I'm going to start with the Bitcoin. Would you suggest starting with the Coinbase or with the doing it yourself?
Initially, for the normal user that doesn't want to get too crazy and confused or anything like that, I would definitely say Coinbase. You can start there. They have two-factor authentication and stuff like that, the normal things you would protect an account with. So that's your best bet. And then once you start learning more on having your own private keys, your own wallet, it's not hard at all to send that transaction out of Coinbase into something that you own completely. But definitely crypto.com or Coinbase would be probably my top two best to start off.
Crypto.com and Coinbase. Awesome. That's a couple of good tips there. So I'm completely new to this. So what can you tell people about Bitcoin that's important that I didn't ask about?
Man, I don't know. You had a lot of great questions. Great questions today. I think we probably covered enough for the normal user. I hope.
Yeah.
I don't really have much else to say off the top of my head. Just be careful, and again, just make sure you're doing your own research and making sure that you're in the end you're ultimately responsible for your own actions when it comes to crypto. I mean, you don't have a fallback on like a bank or stuff where you could call the bank and say, "Hey, my crypto private key got stolen," or whatever. Like, you can't do that with this. So you just got to make sure you know what you're doing. Again, Coinbase and crypto.com make it a lot easier for people to feel secure. You have a big company backing you in that regard. I think even those companies have some sort of protection there. But once you start diving out into the other areas, like be your own bank is one of the sayings in the crypto space. So
yeah, definitely be your own bank, man. That's a cool little catchphrase there, huh?
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Do you want people reaching out to you? Do you want to share any info, any contact info?
Everyone, my Twitter handle is CryptoWag, just crypto WAG. You can find me there. I post random stuff that I find interesting. So, if anyone wants to talk or reach out, you can certainly do it there.
Awesome. Thanks, Charlie. Really appreciate it, man. Learned a lot about the crypto. Learned a lot about the Bitcoin. Of course, it's just my first go at it, and I'm gonna go buy some, and really appreciate your time and your information that you've given us today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.